happy hump day, everybody, and welcome to yet another Ball Publishing webinar. I'm Chris Beatties, editor of Growertalks and Green Profit in the e-newsletter Acres Online. And as usual, I'm going to be your host for the next hour or so as we tackle today's topic. You see it right there on your screen, I hope. Facts on the sustainability of peat. Now, this is a hot topic. It's a timely topic, considering the rising interest in sustainability, in resource management, in cost control at greenhouses and nurseries, shipping and logistics, because you got to get peat to your business, and more. And frankly, peat can be a controversial topic as well, as it's a natural resource, and sometimes the use of it can come under fire from groups or individuals who, in many cases, may not be fully aware of or even really interested in the facts surrounding peat and where it comes from, how it's harvested, and what's being done to preserve and restore peat bogs. So, to that end, we've invited an expert on the topic to present the facts about peat moss to those of you who use peat or sell peat or otherwise have an interest in peat and need to make decisions about peat for your business going forward. And I'd like to welcome her right now. She is Ms. Susan Parent. Bonjour, Susan.
Bonjour, how are you?
I thought that's a little hint to the audience about Susan. Where are you broadcasting from today, Susan?
I'm in Rivière-du-Loup in Quebec. It's along the south shore of the St. Lawrence River. So I'm a little bit far, but really close to the peat bogs.
And are you French, or you just speak French because you're in Quebec?
Well, I speak French most of the time. But part of my family is Irish, like a lot of us French Canadians. We have some Irish descendants. So I was brought up in both languages, in French.
Well, I have 6 weeks of college French.
Okay,
I decided I struggle enough with English. So and I tried it on you the other day. I asked you what time it was, and if you tell me it's 2 o'clock, I might understand it. But you are a biologist and a horticultural specialist with Premier Tech Horticulture. How did you get interested into peat?
Well, that's to make the story short. A long story short, I'm a biologist, but also a soil microbiology specialist and mycorrhiza and all that. And here at Premier Tech, back many years ago, I started a long time ago. They were interested in having my knowledge in R&D, in the research and development at that time, to develop mycorrhiza into growing, peat moss growing media. So that's how it all started. And as they say, you have to live. This is a big industry. Yeah. So I had to learn all about peat, and there's still a lot to learn. And there's a lot of things to learn.
All right. Well, you're going to share a lot with us today. It's going to be fascinating. Let me do a little bit of housekeeping. Oh, and of course, I'm broadcasting from the 49th floor of the Ball Publishing broadcast studios. No, it's the second floor, but I exaggerate a bit. Only in that, though. Never in anything else. Certainly not about peat moss. Let me do a quick screen share for some housekeeping. I always get questions. The first question, actually, this is the second question. How do we ask questions? There's a little Q&A tool on your dashboard. You just type it in there. I will field them as we go along if they're pertinent to the topic. And it won't really interrupt things. Otherwise, we'll save them for the end. Again, if they're pertinent, if we can't get to any, we will save or give you Susan's contact information at the very end, so you can get those questions answered. And the most common question is, will this webinar be archived? Yes, it will be, as always, at the same place you signed up. How convenient is that? Growertalks.com/webinars. And that is it for the housekeeping. So, Susan, I'm going to stop my share, and if you'll go ahead and share your screen, I'm going to let you take it away and tell us the facts on sustainability of peat.
Okay, well, thanks for the great introduction, Chris. You really set the table there for me. Yes, I'm glad to give this presentation. There's a lot of new things that I'd like to share with you about the peat industry and where we are in terms of sustainability. And I don't, ça veut pas avancer.
We
I
had it
don't know
shared before.
why. Yeah, it's kind of blocking
It
right
popped up and
now.
then I unpopped it. So go ahead and pop it back up there.
Okay, maybe I thought it was, I was sharing it. And here we go. Just make sure I've got the right one. Okay, worked so hard on this presentation. So
Yeah.
now, okay, so let's try to make this work. Doesn't seem to, you're on screen sharing.
You just click on it in one spot, and then you'll be able to change the slides.
Ah, there we go. Okay, we're on. Sorry about that little delay. Okay, so I'd like to talk to you about the sustainability of the sphagnum peat moss and the harvesting in Canada. So like Chris said, I'm Susan Parent. I've been working for the company now for more than 35 years. I know that seems like a long time, but actually for me, it's like almost yesterday I started. And there's always lots of things to learn. And like I'll be presenting today, where is the peat industry today in 2021? That picture that you see there on the right, that's a sphagnum bog. So I don't know if you've ever asked yourself, where does this peat come from in my growing media? Well, it comes from the northern temperate zones, and this is how bogs look like in nature. So as you see in the middle there, there's the water, and that's where the peat just accumulates, and it's been doing that for somewhere between 3,000 to 10,000 years ago, when the glaciers receded. I don't know if you all know that the north of North America was covered with ice, many miles of ice, of heavy ice, and that left a lot of water. And this was conducive to the peat moss development and accumulation. And what you see there beyond the bog, you see this forested black spruce type of environment. That is this is very common in the northern peat bogs that we call sphagnum peat bogs, because sphagnum is the dominating type of moss. And there's hundreds of species of different types of mosses, but what characterizes it is that it's a very acid environment, and the water accumulates, and this is just cold weather and a lot of rain is just perfect for the sphagnum development. And sphagnum does accumulate, like it can grow like from 2 to 12 centimeters, so around 6 inches, 4 inches per year of growth of sphagnum in these environments. And it accumulates about 1 millimeter, so that's really, really small. It's less than 1/8 of an inch of accumulation of the peat itself. Just to give you a general idea of peatland and what do we mean about northern environments, this is a map. And here you see there's Canada, you've got the USA here. So Canada is really, has a lot of peatlands. They say about 30–50% of the world's wetlands are peatlands. And a lot of that is here in Canada. We're talking about roughly about 114 million hectares. So that's like 200 and some acres of land that are virgin peat bogs and that are non-used or non-used for extraction of peat. And of that quantity, there's 32,000 hectares, or about 60 acres, 60,000 acres, that are used for harvesting for the past 90 years, because this industry did start a long time ago, where we would harvest the peat moss. You know, it's a great organic matter for soils, for very mineral soils. And that was pretty well the use of peat moss here in Canada for that time. And it's only until recently, until the 60s, that we started making growing media, where people were growing in greenhouses instead of just growing in the field soils. And as you can see here, like in Northern Europe, also there's good environment there for the peat accumulation, or for the wetland accumulations. So this peat is in Canada, and anyways in North America, the peat moss, or the coverage, it represents about 0.03%. So it's a small quantity. If you look at all the other activities where they're using agricultural, like they're using the sphagnum bogs, or the other peat bogs that are closer to the south of the border, that are more like fen bogs or sedge peat bogs. You know, it's a very small amount that is really using for peat moss harvesting. And we could say, oh, you know, we've got lots of resource there, and that could be our attitude, but that's not quite how we see it. We don't see it as not, even though it's very little what we're harvesting, we see peat moss as being something very, very precious. Peat moss, you know, here at Premier Tech, we've been doing this for almost 100 years, harvesting peat, and actually the company is coming very soon to its 100th anniversary. And it's important to preserve it, and also for generations ahead. Yes, you know, the population has grown, there's more and more people, and as we all know, it's agriculture or whatever, it's really important to make sure it's sustainable. And that's something that we've been looking into for many, many years. And I'll be sharing some of things that we're doing to be sustainable. But for starting, sphagnum peat moss, what is it exactly? For those that are not sure what am I buying in my growing media exactly, my peat-based growing media? Peat moss is in the family of the plant family. It is a plant. It's a very primitive type of plant, but very, very sophisticated. And it accumulates, and it has the capacity to, if the weather is good, let's say if there's a lot of rain and a lot of cold weather, the sphagnum peat moss that you see here in this picture can actually invade soils where there's already trees growing. So it can adapt, and it can even push away the trees, and if I can say that, and in certain senses, because it's so competitive for water. It has really an incredible capacity to hold water. And so this peat moss, this is the living, that's what we call the living peat moss. And that picture that we saw previously, this is the peat moss that has began to biodegrade, and that is generally used in growing media, because when it's this green, if I can say, it'll biodegrade really, really fast, and we won't have so much stability in our growing media. So the yearly accumulation of this peat moss is estimated at 20 million tons per year. That's across all peat bogs, you know, mixed together, the virgin, all the virgin ones that are not exploited. And of all that peat moss that grows or that accumulates per year, there's about 1.3 million or 1.4 million tons that are harvested each year in North America. And what I'm presenting here is really the facts for North America or for Canada. Okay, I'm not going to go into what's going on in Europe. The situation is a bit different over there. You might have heard about, you know, bans on peat and things like that over there, is because their available peat bogs are very, there's a lot less peat available. And unfortunately, they really, I would say, extracted heavily. And the environmental situation called for, that we had to limit the extraction of peat moss in Europe. So that the case in Canada, we're not there. And in Canada, I think what's really, really important to know is that it's only used for horticulture. So here on this side here, you see a typical bog bean harvest. You see the harvesters there at the end of the field. And this is how they'll go and pick up some, with these vacuum harvesters, they'll pick the peat up, and then they'll dump here by the edge of the road where we pick up the peat, and then we bring it to the manufacturing plants and make the growing media. So this is this can go on. Maybe there's 30, 40 days in the summer where we can harvest peat moss. So it's a very dependent. The harvest is very dependent on the weather. If it's raining a lot, the equipment can't go out into the fields because we want to preserve the peat bogs, and we don't want to cause compaction and things like that because it's so wet. So sometimes you might hear about, oh, there's peat shortages this year, or there's, we have to limit the availability of peat, or there's concern about peat availability. It's not because we don't have any peat to harvest. It's because the weather did not let us harvest as much as we forecasted during the year. So I just wanted to clear that when we talk about peat shortage, it's not because we're missing peat. We're missing peat just because of it's weather related. So this is something that, and the industry that backs all the Canadian peat companies. It's called Canadian Sphagnum Peat Moss Association, and I will refer to it further on. They have a website, and I'll give you that information towards the end of the presentation. You can get a lot of the information about what's the status. This year they're going to be posting their report about the 2021 harvest, and they give you a lot of information about the status of the peat for this year. Okay, so what is so special? What is so special about peat moss that till 2021, even though we know there's a lot of other products there in the market, why is peat moss still so precious? And if we want to kind of limit the reasons, the whys, it's because it provides 3 essential elements for plants. And probably a lot of you already know this, but yes, peat moss is lightweight, but it does have really great water retention. So it'll hold water up to 20 times its weight in water. So that means that when you water it, it'll have all that water available for the plants, but it will also let the water drain out. And then these are really 2 key factors: water retention and the drainage. And the other essential element about peat moss, or the essential information to know about peat moss, is that it does have some nutrient retention, which means that when you fertilize or you irrigate your plants, it'll hold on to some of that nutrition. It will not immobilize it, like in the soil. Sometimes you fertilize, but the plants don't seem to be able to pick it up. There's some kind of something is blocking the nutrients and they're not available. Whereas in plants, it's readily available for plants and peat moss. So these are like the 3 factors that make it such a really important component in the growing media. There's other factors also to know, is that because it's growing in such an acid environment, naturally plant pests and weeds and things like that are not available in the peat bog. So we're not harvesting anything that, like way back in the olden days, where you'd pick up black soil and make mixes with that, and then you could run into diseases and things. This does not happen with peat moss. And also it's harvested in a very pollutant-free, I would say almost pure environment. It's in the north. It's not heavily industrious in this part of the country there up in the north. So it's safe. And by the way, peat moss is approved. You must all know that, but it is approved for organic use. For a lot of the growing media that are made are now approved for organic or meet organic standards. Other components are used in growing media, but they all, anyways, maybe some people will not agree with me on that, but most of the time, these other components still need peat moss. There's a few exceptions, of course, and there's certain applications that does not meet, but most of the time, I would say almost 80% of crops or 90% of crops are grown do really, really well with the peat moss mixed with other components, but the peat moss component has always been important to have a good crop. So like we say in the industry, the peat is a bit like an enabler. So it allows the other additives that we add to do a great job because there's the peat. So no offense on other products, they're all great products, but so far that's our observation with peat, and I'm sure a lot of the other people in the industry agree with me on this.
All right. Before you move from the slide, Susan, we've got a couple of questions that pertain directly to what you're talking to. Brian, my friend Brian, wants to know, he says some crops require growing media that's free of microorganisms that could possibly cause human disease. He gives aspergillus as one example. Is peat uniformly free of such organisms?
That's a really good question, and there's our natural occurring microorganisms in peat moss, but none that are human pathogens or things like that. Aspergillus, particularly, I'm not sure if which one we're talking about, which strain, but there are molds. And I think maybe the aspergillus does fit into that category. There are molds naturally present in peat moss. It could just, when we harvest it, and all depending on the humidity, they will follow. A lot of these molds are beneficial, like some of them are trichoderma, and so some are actually beneficial molds, but yet I can't say that there's zero molds. Because we do dry down the peat, there's very few, but there are some that can be present.
All right. There's a lot more crops that are being maybe, edible, smokable, and certainly a lot of them in Canada. And, so whether or not peat is being used and whether it can be used for that, I guess was sort of the question.
Okay.
Roger wants to know, why does peat not break down in the soil, once it's in the potting mix, or does it break down?
Well, eventually it will break down. That's for sure, because you're feeding it with nutrients, and there's microorganisms there in the container. So it'll break down a little bit, but not that much to cause that you fill a container with growing media, and then after 2 weeks, everything has shrunk down by half. So there might be a little bit of shrinkage due to compaction or due to a little bit of breakdown, but not that.
Okay, but because it's kind of done its decomposition from the sphagnum moss portion
exactly.
of it down to the peat portion of it.
Yeah.
Where it's down to more of the organic matter, which is why it's used as a fuel in Europe in many cases, right? Because you're down to kind of the carbon content.
Yeah, the carbon is definitely, peat moss is an excellent, and it's an excellent carbon sequestration process, so it does pull in a lot of the CO2 in the atmosphere. In Europe, regarding the fuel, it's really a whole different strategy over there. I don't think they use the same type of peat as we're using. We're using a very fibrous peat. You don't want that really dark peat that some people call it muck or things like that. We're not using that in the hort industry. We're using a fibrous peat. So there is a little bit of biodegradation, but just a little bit.
All right, one more quick one. One more, then we'll move on. Jacob wants to know if peat is consistently free of weed seeds.
Yes, it is, I would say 99.999% free of weed seed. Where you can get, sometimes some people say, hey, I'm seeing something growing. We don't know what happens when they're let's say you put the peat in a potting machine? Is there birds flying? Even, it can happen now and then that there's a bird and they drop some seed and bingo, we've got a contamination, but it's pretty rare. Normally where we're harvesting the peat, we really are really strict on making sure that in the ditches and all that there's no weeds growing that could blow weed seed into the field.
All right. Okay, good. That's all the questions for now.
Okay, good. Okay, so back to sphagnum peat moss. As we know, sphagnum peat moss has really good properties for growing in greenhouse. It's consistent, it's reliable, the quality. I think I know Premier Tech, we really work hard on quality, and I know that the other companies in the industry, the other stakeholders do the same. So, and this is something that the peat moss can provide. And also, another thing that's really important about the peat moss is that its use in the industry. There's there's a good proportion of the peat moss that's used for the edible industry. And during COVID, we realized that this was a substance that could cross the borders because it was considered a priority. It was for a food security system. Peat moss is part of that food production system. You've got an example here with mushrooms. Mushroom growers grow, and they use manure, but they do top dress with peat moss, and it's really important for the production of peat moss. All our vegetable growers, and here you've got at the bottom here, this is a leek grower, this is a pepper grower. These are other types of crops that use the peat substrates before they go into the field or that they're transplanted into another environment. But the peat is really important, and we kind of realize that how important our system, or how vulnerable our system is when it comes to food security when we were in COVID-19. And and that the greenhouse industry continued to produce food for everyone. And also here we call it like the well-being. We're referencing to the medicinal market, the cannabis growers. As we all know, this is legal up here in the north and in many states in the U.S. It's legal to produce, and this is like a medicine. There's a lot that is used for recreational, but there's still a good proportion of that is used for medicinal, and that also became a priority, or that was an essential crop during this past pandemic, and also for reforestation. Peat moss is used a lot here. This is like a nursery that produces like Douglas firs or black spruce or things like that, where you need to reforest the soils. You have to produce those trees. So these are important users of peat moss, and this is something that we kind of realized during COVID, where we fit in, and I guess we kind of underevaluated where we really fit into this industry. Sustainability. So that kind of brings us back to our first question: is how can we be sustainable? How can we guarantee that this peat moss is going to be available for generations to come? So in order to go that way, I just want to go back again in the past. This was the beginning of my career there over 30 years ago. The industry already began to investigate how can we have like a book of best management practices and guidelines in this industry, a bit like they have it in the wood industry. We wanted to have something that will be maybe ahead of our time, because like 30 years ago, environment and warming of climate and things like that, or climate change or heat. Yeah, there was heat issues, but maybe this is more, we hear a lot more about it anyways than in 2021. So we started with the industry, with the Canadian sphagnum peat moss industry and the different stakeholders, we asked these questions, how can we manage responsibly peat bogs? This, by the way, is what we call a restored peat bog. So it's long time ago, we would harvest peat in this area, and now you see it looks pretty well like 99% almost like a normal peat bog. So in order to have this responsibly managed peat bog, we had to work with a lot of universities that would do the research and would provide us the management tools. Managing the peat resource, the objective would be 100% of peatlands will be preserved. That would be really great. We're not, there's still that 0.03% that we are harvesting in, and we have to protect that environment that we are harvesting in. We also have to understand that, yes, there are some carbon emission when we are harvesting, but what's important to know, and maybe there's more and more research that's being done on that, is that the fact that we're producing plants, we're producing trees with this peat-based growing media, well, in a certain amount of that carbon is sequestered back into the tree, because we're, that like trees, for example, and plants are all good carbon sequesters. So until we have better alternatives, right now, what we're really looking at is how can we minimize the impact, and I'll share with you some of the work that has been done. Sustainable approach, and how is the industry assessing this sustainability is a big question, and I won't go into too much detail because it can be quite long, and maybe someday you could invite a researcher. I'll present towards the end many of the researchers that in different universities that are working on this. But I think one thing that's important, and that we did start way back 30 years ago, is peat bog restoration. So when we decide that we don't feel it's worth, we've gone down deep enough in the bog, and we decide to stop the harvest, is that we restore it. And we always keep virgin bogs around the harvested area to be able to use that living sphagnum to recolonize the environment. And I'm going to go into that in a little bit more detail in a couple of slides. Also, the industry has given themselves like a best management guidelines to so that we follow some rules, like when it's very, very windy, you don't go out and harvest and have all this dust that spraying all over the place in the nearby communities near the peat bogs. Also energy reduction programs, because yes, we do use a lot of equipment, but how can we use this the best way we can and reduce the use of fuel? So these are all things that are integrated with and this is the Canadian Sphagnum Peat Moss Association is pretty well the orchestra leader there in writing up all these programs. And also the last one here is a certification. It's Verifora for responsible peatland management, that the peat industry can get certified so that we are taking care of these lands.
And Susan, real quick,
yes.
I should have clarified at the beginning that while you work for Premier Tech, you're speaking of practices that all the Canadian producers are using, have agreed to use, not just Premier Tech's practices, correct?
Yeah, well, Premier Tech has implemented them, and all the industry has also come on board. I think it's like 90%, or there's maybe some exceptions, but most all companies have come on board.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that.
Well, it's because, yeah, there's Premier Tech and we have our products, but as the idea is like in the forestry, they have their rules of operation, and if you want to have a good name about a resource, well, everyone has to be on board, or almost everyone. Which leads to this other slide here, which is the National Peatland Restoration Initiative, where we're using peat moss, so living peat moss, and they call it the moss layer transfer technique. And this has been developed by university partners. The reference here is that there's the one in Quebec at the University of Laval that works on this, and that worked a lot with us and all our teams that are really involved in the management of the restoration. And this has become pretty well, I think, in other parts of the world also, when they want to restore land, they are using similar methods for their restored bogs. So I think the key here was really to connect with the science community. Us, we're in the industry. We're harvesting peat, and certain aspects of more fundamental research that really pertain to the universities, but that have written, the guidelines and the ecological restoration, for example, and measuring, okay, well, when does peat become a carbon sink? How many years does it take? So different things like that the university people have been looking at, and biodiversity. I mean, it's not just about sphagnum peat moss, but there's also other insects, there's birds, there's a whole environment. Peat bogs are very, there's a huge variety of plants and all that. And it was important to see, well, okay, what is it like when it's restored a bog? How close are we to the virgin bog, before we started to harvest? Just a couple of statistics here about this. Again, this is for the whole country in Canada, where there's about 32,000 hectares that are in harvest. 4,800 are in the process of being restored with that technique that we talked about, the moss layer that is reinstored in the peat bogs. There's 18,000 hectares that are currently being harvested. And there's 4,000 hectares, so that's about 8,000 acres that have been ceased. And when we say ceased, and here you see on the picture is a typical bog that has been returned to its original state, and you see people there measuring the productivity and the plant diversity in the bog. So I'll give you some concrete stuff. The 5 steps in restoring a peat bog. And this is, like I said, it's still improved, and we're still learning new things, but we have to, we have to prepare the surface, we have to level the bog. And then we have to remove the drainage, because in order to harvest the peat, you have to drain like an agriculture soil. So we have to let the water table rise. And we replant the live sphagnum and other bog plants back into this environment. So what we see here, there on the right here, this is like a spreader being pulled with a tractor. The bog here has been leveled. The water table has gone up. And here you see it just using the living bog in a virgin, the living sphagnum in a virgin bog, and they're just reinstalling it back into the restored area. And then we cover with a mulch. Generally it's hay. Sometimes it's fertilized, and the regrowth occurs. So here you see the hay being toppled over the sphagnum and other plants that were stored. And it occurs, and there's information out there about how many centimeters are growing and what is the level or the thickness of the new growth of the peat in the bog. And this is just like a survey that we did. This is a bog. This is near Rivière-du-Loup, where we have our head office in Quebec in Canada. And this is a bog in 2000 that was closed, that got, we introduced the living sphagnum. And this was monitored by the group at University of Laval at that time. They had a chair for peat ecology and peatland ecology. And you see that, gradually the vegetation is taking over. This is a picture in 2006 where it's pretty well closed. So the sphagnum has really started to grow in quantity. And probably at this stage here, 4 or 5 years ago, normally the peat bog is really sequestering the carbon, whereas here there could be some carbon emission, and here it's almost finished. So this is just to give you an idea of how it works.
Susan, about
Yeah.
how many inches or feet were taken off of that bog before the restoration process started? How much lower is it than it
Mm.
was originally? Do you know?
That particular one, I'm not sure. Maybe 2 feet, 3 feet. Maybe it went down 2 to 3 feet.
Okay. And Sarah's curious. She asked, "How quickly can you reharvest from a restored bog? Has anyone done that yet, or do you not need to touch the restored bogs
Okay, well,
because you
yeah,
have
that's
other
a
bogs?"
yeah, that's a really important point. To this day, we don't go back. We don't go back to the restored bogs. It's we leave nature take care of it. There is some maintenance that needs to be maintained. We have to keep an eye on the water tables, make sure that we're sufficient water, that everything is good for the continuous development and layering of the sphagnum peat
Okay.
moss.
Very good.
Okay.
I'll stop interrupting.
Oh no, well, yeah, no, it's good. It makes it a little bit more dynamic. Hope no one's falling asleep there behind their screen.
Not a
So,
chance.
okay, so just to repeat a little bit about the best management practices and the guidelines. Like I said, this is the Canadian sphagnum peat moss that has been pretty well making sure that everyone is aware of these. That 90% of the production in North America is following these guidelines and that are very Flora certified, and I'll touch about that in a couple of minutes. And that through the promotion that these peatlands, it is a bit of a disturbance to the site, but that there is ways of bringing it back and being responsible while we are using this peat moss. And there's programs also that are issued for fossil fuel reduction that are given by the Canadian Sphagnum Peat Moss Association. Also, this is I was talking a bit about this. This is a Veriflora certification, and most of the Canadian producers are certified by this organization, where they look at to make sure that we're harvesting the peat moss in an environmentally and a socially responsible manner, and that we're preserving peatlands for the future generations, so that we are limiting, we're not just going out there and picking up as we can, that we're really following a plan to limit the impact and the stress on the environment. And also the workers and the nearby communities, that they are not affected. I mentioned about when it's very hot or very windy, we have guidelines that we have to follow because there are residential developments now that are coming close to the bogs, and when you're harvesting and you're blowing and the wind is picking up the dust of the peat, can be of a problem. So we do have internal control of that, where we don't harvest if the winds are too strong, and we have indicators like that, like where we measure the temperature in those peat piles to make sure it's not too hot. We don't want fires, because yes, peat moss can take on fire quite easily when it gets hot. And those peat piles, it can get really hot up in there. It can go up to 70 Celsius. So that must be like about 150 or something like that Fahrenheit. So it can ignite if it gets too dry. So these are all things that this group looks over. And I mentioned about all the different universities that are involved, and the sustainability and the industry social responsibility. And these are the people that we work with. Dr. Lachashval, she's at Laval, she's into peat ecology. There's wetland hydrology, so we have to look at what's going on in the water tables, biochemistry and geochemistry, the irrigation system, soil science, and biogeoscience. So there's the 1, 2, 3, 4 universities that are involved, a lot in the east, but also in University of Alberta that are looking at all this and working with the industry to always review our best practice management. There's documents that you can get that are on the Canadian Sphagnum Peat Moss Association that go over all of this if you're skeptical of what I'm saying. There's always more research, and this is a continuing ongoing thing. The best management practices, also guidelines. Yeah, we have developed some, but if they need to be updated. Things like life cycle analysis have been done in the past, and with new information coming into the matrix and the industry. These are types of things that have to be looked into. There's things that have been done, but the statistics on the peat land uses and the whole peat land restoration initiative is something really important for all the stakeholders in the industry. And so I'm finishing up there. This is just a citation of one of those workers. The fact on the sustainability of peat is that the peat moss industry is here to stay for generations to come. And with wise use and with renewable peatland management, I think we can think about many generations after us that will still be using or having access to peat moss. So on that, I thank you. And you've got my email. If ever you have any questions and more information, you can go to the website of the Canadian Sphagnum Peat Moss Association for more information on all I've presented.
And I'll pop that address, that email address up before we conclude. But Susan, thanks so much. That was fascinating. We've got a few more questions that have come in. And I probably got a few of my own. Let's see. Ivan asks, does the government in any way regulate the peat moss industry or the harvesting of peat moss?
Yeah, the government in different provinces, there's different regulations. And so yes, there are regulations. You can't just go and open up a peat bog and hey, so there's a lot of permits that are needed. There's also the First Nations. A lot of them, it's on land that belongs to First Nations. So you have to have permissions. So there's a lot of paperwork before you go and open up in a bog. And we do have to comply. So not only that we have internal best management practices, but we have to comply with environmental ruling. For example, what are we doing with the water? You know, when you drain a bog, where is that water going? Well, we have to have sedimentation tools so that, you know, we're not just polluting all the water tables around. And so there's a lot of, yes, there is a lot. I don't work in that specifically, but there's a huge team just here at Premier Tech. There's a lot of people that are working on all those permits to be able to open up a peat bog and
right.
close
You just don't show up on a bog with one of those giant vacuum cleaners and start sucking the stuff up. There's too much red tape.
Oh, there's a lot of red tape. Yeah.
Freedom wants to know if, that's a great name, Freedom, is the peat harvesting and use in North America increasing, decreasing, or staying about the same year over year?
I think we're pretty stable year to year. Yeah, we have to close some and then we open some, but the idea is that we want to be as sustainable as possible. So there's no, let's go, you know, and produce a lot. I think so far, even though with the increase in demand in growing media for the edible market, you know, for the marijuana market and all that, I think we still have been able to satisfy those markets. And we hope to continue that way.
Miranda wants to know about the outlook for the next, this coming season, she says, because this past year there was a shortage or it was a little bit tight. How's supply looking now?
Okay. Well, you know, that's a really good question because I just got a press release from the Canadian Sphagnum Peat Moss Association today. And from what I read, in the western part of the country, things look really good. In the eastern part of the country, there was some rain, so we're a little bit under, as an industry, we're a little bit under the forecasts. So hopefully we'll have enough peat there to carry us over till 2022, the next season.
Right. And
So
enough trucks to get it to us.
the truckers, yeah, but at least they're not stuck in the ocean somewhere on a, at least,
Right. Yes. Buy the domestic stuff. Exactly right.
yeah.
Jeremy wants to know, kind of along those same lines, despite the the sustainability and availability of peat, is Premier Tech working on any replacements for peat?
Oh, we're looking at a lot of, like I said, I think peat moss will never be replaced totally. But we do look at other additives. We've been looking at cocoa fiber mixed with peat moss. And yeah, we're looking at other fibers, but we want it to be good fibers. We don't want it to be some kind of residue from some industry that is maybe not so, like, let's say, I don't know, reusing certain substances that we don't want necessarily in our plants.
Right. You don't want somebody else's leftovers, in other words.
Right. Yeah.
There's a lot been done with pine bark lately.
Pine bark, yeah, and we have a production site there in Virginia where we use a lot of bark to make those mixes and to serve locally. Also to be as local as possible, less transport. And
sure.
All that has to be integrated in the equation.
All right. Michael says that was awesome with four exclamation points, and Michael is correct on that point. And Al, I'll wrap up with Al's questions because this is a good one. He says, on social media, there are so many people bashing peat, including from Europe. You maybe even hear it more there. How can we change the perspective, the understanding about peat?
Well, I think it's a lot about education and giving us the opportunity, like today, to talk about our industry and to understand what's going on. I think we have to do that, and I think the information has to go out there. Some people maybe don't want to hear it. There's always going to be some, some that are resistant to it. But I think it's all about education and understanding about the peat bogs. And I think us as an industry, we have to work harder on that too, to take occasions like this and put the information out there on the web. Maybe we're not present enough on the web or on the different platforms to talk about peat moss. And that's a really good idea.
Well, you know what? You're starting with this webinar by sharing this information. Everyone in the industry can share this, can link to it once I have the link up, put it on your social media, share it with your grower customers, retailers or garden center, end consumers, wherever you can, just so they have this perspective, because they may not be getting it otherwise. They're just reading a few random headlines on social media, and you know where that usually gets us. That's all the questions, and so what I want to do is just one more quick screen share. I'll give you Susan's email address again. It's PARS@Premier Tech. I figured out the code. It's the first three letters of your last name and then the first letter of your first name.
And that's how you can reach.
If you know somebody who works for Premier Tech and you know their name, you can email them. I figured it out.
Well, almost. It's because I'm an old one that I have no numbers. The younger ones that have been hired, they have lots of numbers. So
I knew there'd be a catch.
Yeah.
All right. And yes, this webinar will be archived. As soon as Zoom makes the recording available to me, I will link it to the webinar page, which you can find at growertalks.com/webinars. It will be the very first on-demand webinar that you'll find there, and we'll share that as well. If you want to come back, watch it again, share it with your friends. I know one person had to leave early, and she hated it. She says you were fascinating, Susan, but she only had a half-hour lunch break.
Too long.
I
was too long. Yeah. Well, I tried to respect the time, so.
All right. Well, with that, I want to say thanks, Susan. You were great. That was a fascinating presentation. We'll have to do it again and dig further into the world of peat moss. So on behalf of Susan and everyone at Premier Tech, and on behalf of stellar ball publishing staff who work hard so I don't have to. I'm Chris Beatty saying au revoir, everybody.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Thank you.
Thanks, Susan. We'll see
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye.
Au revoir.